Good morning. Welcome, everyone, to your Farm and Ranch Friday podcast. I am your host, Lindsay Holland, and boy, do we have a treat for you today. I just got to say, I'm a huge fan. Today, we have the host of the Ag Law in the Field podcast, Tiffany Lashmet. I can't even start, guys. Like, she is, an attorney, a professor, Texas A&M Ag Life Extension. She is the know-all, be-all, at least for me in our industry to help our landowners. And we're going to dive into two publications and classes that she has available that really will step up your game in assisting your landowners, specifically new landowners, to the laws that they need to be savvy to and be aware. You have a big piece of property, it could be a major liability. It's a great part of your portfolio, but keeping your clients safe and recommending these sources so they can educate themselves to continue on to have this property without incident or minimal risk is very, very important. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tiffany. Tiffany, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be in this position as a farm and ranch land icon for our industry?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I would like you to follow me around and just do my introduction everywhere, Lindsay. That was very kind. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. So I grew up on my family farm and ranch in eastern New Mexico. And so agriculture has just sort of always been in my blood. I went to undergrad and got an ag business degree and then went to law school and had a law degree. And I was practicing law, doing civil litigation, kind of high-end, big money lawsuits for about 4 years. And an email about this job came across my desk. And if you could write up like the dream job for me, this would be it. And so I applied and got it. And that was 10 years ago. And so the rest is kind of history. But it's a super fun job. Like you say, I work for Texas A&M Agri Life Extension. I'm the statewide agricultural law specialist. And so I basically just get to spend my days working with rural landowners, ag producers, real estate agents, talking to them about different legal issues that they could face. And I do that in a variety of ways. We're going to talk about that today. I write, I've got handbooks, I've got a podcast, I've got a blog, I do in-person presentations. So kind of my whole goal is just to help educate, like say, rural landowners and ag producers on legal issues they need to be aware of.
That is so awesome. So personally, I follow your blog. It's amazing. And your podcast. And I've shared that information with my landowners and with my clients, whether it be buyers or sellers, because I've always told other agents, you are the source of the sources. So that information that you're sharing needs to be quality and relevant to what's going on. And in Farm and Ranch, your curriculum is just dynamite and on point and really shows the do's, the don'ts, and please be aware of. So yes, everyone listening, in the description, we are going to have all the links to the handbooks, a schedule to some of our upcoming classes here in Texas. I was blessed enough actually to take and go to one of her courses in real life, in the flesh, and it's Owning Your Piece of Texas, Key Laws that Texas Landowners Need to Know. She actually provides this for free, everyone. I mean, think about this. You have this amazing educational piece you can give to your clients, free by PDF. I actually started giving it as a closing gift. I buy the hard copy and give to my clients. Can you just dive in some of the overview of this, how this came about and what the goal is for this curriculum on this piece of education you've provided?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Lindsay, I love that you look at yourself sort of as the source to the sources. I think that's exactly right. I mean, especially if you've got new rural landowners, so many of them look to their real estate agent for everything, right? Every type of information they're looking for. Certainly, a lot of it has nothing to do with them actually buying or selling the property, but you have the connections and you know the people in the community. And so I think, don't overlook that kind of power that you have and that information you can give people. And because of that, that's one of the reasons we recently started focusing more on, educational outreach to real estate agents. So that's just an aside before I jump into your actual question. So yeah, owning your piece of Texas is a really fun project. We started this several years ago when we got grant funding to write the handbook that you mentioned, and that's what's up on the screen. It's just about a 15 chapter handbook written for Texas landowners, and it looks at the specific legal issues they need to be aware of. So, everything from water law to property taxes, landowner liability, fence law, eminent domain, kind of all the major issues. It at least gives you an overview and kind of helps you flag what issues could come up, what questions would I want to ask, right? All those types of things. And so we wrote the handbook first, truly with landowners in mind. And we really did our best to, make sure this is not something that's like law schooly and terrible to read. Like we tried to write it for, normal person audience. And so that's what that handbook is for. And so from that, we've developed a couple of additional pieces. One of them is the live courses that you mentioned you attended. Those are so much fun. It's a day-long course. We bring in guest speakers, other lawyers from the community, or folks that work with us at Texas A&M that have expertise. And the other thing that we do that I think is really cool is we let everybody ask questions. I mean, so a lot of times I think the information we get while answering questions in the room is sometimes even better than what we had scripted. So those in-person programs, we do 4 or 5 a year, like I say, all around the state. And so that's our live component. Realizing that for a lot of people, they're not able to get to the exact location at the exact time where we're able to offer these classes. We also have an online course option. And so that one's a little bit longer. It actually goes through every topic in the book. And it is available online, kind of on demand all the time. It's about 8.5 hours worth of content. So that's a lot of me, I can tell you. But we've got that online option as well for folks. So like I say, kind of 3 pieces: the handbook, the in-person classes, and the online class. Important for real estate agents, if you want the CE credit, if you come to the in-person class, we can give 7 hours of CE credit, which is great for you to knock out a big chunk of credit and get a lot of really good information. Do note here that we cannot give CE credit for the online course. So if you're wanting the information, online course, great option. If you need a CE credit, you're going to have to track us down and come to one of the live classes.
Well, also too, what I like to remind, brokers and agents that yes, we got out of this COVID world of being behind a computer screen, but truly meeting in person, the amount of contacts I met from your event blew my mind. Not just other real estate agents, but there were other landowners there. You had Blake from the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension there. Just some of your sponsors. You had some attorneys
Absolutely.
there that I got to talk to. So taking advantage of that full day class. Just the networking I did was worth the time and the money. And then too, like you said, the CE. So highly recommended. I was over the moon, just blown away. I know a lot. I've been selling ranches since 2015. My father is a surveyor. So I grew up on land and dirt. To learn something new and a lot of it, like I was like, man, I should have took this class years ago.
I love that.
So there's another amazing handbook that you created that I feel like is so underrated and not known. I sell a lot of hunting ranches, and liability for hunting ranches, any ranch, but for hunting ranches is huge. And I get those clients that like, oh, sign this form, and I look at this form and I'm like, is this really legal? Like, is this going to protect you? So, and also when people buy a ranch, new landowners, there's normally some sort of grazing lease until they figure out how they want to transfer the ag extension, the ag valuation on the property. And their handshake leases and all this stuff. So like the fact that you wrote a handbook to help ranchers and landowners understand that liability and how to protect themselves. Can you tell me a little bit, can you tell our audience a little bit more about this handbook and then also the curriculum you have to support it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually was the predecessor before the Owning Your Piece of Texas class. We did this one first. And it's really the same setup: handbook, live classes, online classes. This is sort of my formula. It has worked for me. So everything gets set up the same way. But this one's kind of what started everything. And like you say, it's focused specifically on leases that you would deal with as a rancher. And so I'll tell you why I came into this. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, a lot of it from the Midwest, on farm leases. So if you're going to have like a row crop lease for corn or cotton or sorghum, there's a lot of information out there available on the internet to help you, get that lease in order, information about how that works, etc. There was very little of that type of information at the time for ranch leases, right? So grazing leases, pasture leases, hunting leases, huge deal in Texas. And livestock leases, right? Like if you're going to lease a bull from somebody, for example, there just wasn't very much information on that area. And so it was with that in mind that we set out, again, got grant funding and wrote this handbook and it's written for landowners and tenants alike, right? It works for everybody, to just sort of walk you through what issues you need to think through if you're going to do a lease on ranch land. And so, lots of things we cover. Obviously, me trying to convince you that those handshake leases are a bad idea is a big chunk of the book, because that's a lot. It's a hard sell for some people, right? That we need to put these leases in writing. So there's a section on that. We talk a lot about price setting. We talk a lot about the terms that should be in your lease. And that includes, like, there is actually a checklist for each of the 3 types of leases and sample lease language that you can pull from to develop your lease as well. So I think really good information there. And then, like you say, important for everybody who's a landowner, liability issues. I think those are really exaggerated when you're dealing with a hunting lease, right? Just more to consider. And so we do have an entire section in the handbook and in the class on how landowners can protect themselves from liability. And like I say, it's applicable across the board to any rural landowner needs that information. But I really get a lot of questions about that when it comes to hunting leases, like you mentioned.
So, in your class that you taught, you did cover, even though we weren't going over this leasing handbook, you covered leases. And the part that got me was the person leasing the property also needs to have their own leasing guidelines and their own insurance and their when you started talking that, I'm sitting here thinking, how many ranches do I know that lease out to an outfitter? And it's like, okay, well, what has that outfitter, do you have a checklist for that? You rent your house, sometimes people have rental houses, right? Well, they require that renter to have renter's insurance and liability insurance. And when you open that Pandora's box, my mind was just blown on, it's so easy to overlook because we don't know the law. We also don't see the lawsuits like you see.
That's right.
And I'll tell you, some of the examples you gave in our class that we had with you presenting, I just wanted to share maybe some of those. I think if you have some examples of hunting, that would be great. But the one that stuck with me actually had to do with a bunch of friends, and they've been friends forever, and the kids got on horseback.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one? Because I mean, that's a scenario that could happen to any landowner and their buddies hanging out at the ranch.
Yeah, I think that's a really effective example because, like you just said, all of us have done that, right? And so it's like, oh my gosh, they ended up in court over something we've done a million times. That case specifically had to do with the Farm Animal Liability Act. So it's not hunting related, but I think still really relevant and effective. And what happened there, you had these 2 families who had been friends forever. The one family goes to the other's ranch for the weekend. They've spent the entire day. The men have been working cattle all day. And at the end of the day, there's a bunch of horses tied up on the fence, and a 6-year-old from the visiting family wants to ride a horse. And so they pull 2 horses off the fence. They put the 6-year-old on one, another kid on the other, tell them ride down to the end of the road, turn around and come back. Again, I have a 6-year-old. Like, this is stuff we do at my house, right? And so that happened. They ride to the end of the road. They turn around and come back. And the 6-year-old visitor's horse takes off running. kid falls off, gets injured, and that family sues their friends, the ranch owners. And the lawsuit was for negligence, right? That they shouldn't have put that child on that horse. And so as a defense, the ranch owners raised this statute that every landowner needs to be aware of, or every animal owner, called the Farm Animal Liability Act. And it basically says you're not liable for injuries that occur during a farm animal activity if they're an inherent risk to that activity. Classic example is if you crawl on a horse, you could get bucked off, right? Even if everybody does everything right, that can happen. And so in that case, the court actually did dismiss the case. But at the appellate level, it was a 2-1 decision. So I always tell people it wasn't a slam dunk, and it's something you need to be aware of as a landowner. Something as simple as, not dangerous, that was nothing crazy. Nobody was drinking. It wasn't what we think of. These accidents can happen. On the hunting side, everybody always thinks about, well, we've got people out there with guns, but I'll tell you where this comes up more than that is with ATVs, right? Lots of bad accidents happen with ATVs, particularly ATVs and kids, right? Minor children. And so I think that's something that from a hunting lease perspective, certainly need to be aware. Like you said, everybody needs insurance. You need to make sure you're complying so that you have the defense of the recreational use statute and the Agritourism Act. You need to have those waivers like you mentioned before, and they need to be, I recommend them being done by a lawyer. Make sure that they're valid. There's lots of steps you can take to protect yourself, but you got to do it before something happens. And like I say, it's not always like the crazy story that you're like, well, obviously this was going to end bad. A lot of times it's stuff we do every day and a fluke thing happens and there's an injury.
Absolutely. And you know what, you're kind of pulling me into the next, just the next topic. Because the one thing I learned that was major was all these statutes that are there to protect our landowners, and they need to be savvy in understanding how they work for them. So obviously making money on your ranch has, at least in this day and age, we've all had to get very creative. That's right. Not just hunting ranches, but we have these ranches that are now like little zoos, and people are doing vineyards, or they're doing trails, or Airbnbs on a ranch, wedding venues, so to speak. Can you talk a little bit about that recreational statute you just mentioned?
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Lindsay. There are these 3 statutory protections for rural landowners. We've got tons of information on this, podcasts and book chapters and all of this. But the 3 are the Texas Recreational Use Statute, the Agritourism Act, and the Farm Animal Liability Act. If you own rural land, you need to study up on these because they will protect you in certain situations. The recreational use statute specifically applies to agricultural land when the injured person was there for a recreational activity. That's really broadly defined. So things like hunting, fishing, swimming, riding 4-wheelers, hiking, nature walks, bird watching. And then the statute says, and anything else associated with enjoying nature or the outdoors. So it's very broad. And for that statute to apply, there's really 3 kind of monetary options. As long as you meet one, you get the protections. If you've got ag land and the person injured was there for a recreational activity, one of them is if you let them in for free. So I'll get that question a lot, right? My neighbors want to come hunt hogs is usually the example, right? They want to come hunt hogs for free. I'm worried about liability. Well, one protection you have in that scenario is this recreational use statute. And under the statute, you're not liable for negligence. They can't sue you. Well, they can sue you. They can't successfully sue you for negligence, right? They would have to prove something higher, like gross negligence or an intentional act. It's a great protection. For those of us who maybe aren't letting hunters come for free, right? We're trying to diversify our income. There's an option there, and there's some math you can do to see if you fall within that definition. It looks at your property taxes you pay versus the income you make. So that's another option. And then there's one option that says, we don't care how much you charge, as long as you carry $1 million insurance policy, the statute applies. So it's a great protection. One of the great things about that statute is there's no paperwork, there's no signs, there's no chasing people down with your waiver. The statute just automatically applies if you meet the requirements. So highly, highly encourage folks, look into that. Make sure you have that protection.
And you know what's crazy is the more I sat there and listened to what you were saying, you're not just talking about the hunters. I mean, think about the veterinarians, the capture crews. You know, we have mass exotic wildlife ranches here in Texas, and some of those animals are extremely dangerous to work with. But you have to have, you know, that vet and your workers, and like I said, the capture crews flying over your place in a helicopter. And you know, the more I think about it, I'm like, wow, there's lawsuits at every, you know, turn as a landowner. So when it comes to, you know, having an active ranch and just all the options, what's the most common mistake do you see landowners making?
Oh, great question. I'll give you two. I think one of them is do not overlook the importance of those liability protections. Like I say, I've got this list, and that's how it's structured in the book. It's 5 steps to protect yourself, but people don't think about that until there's already been an accident. So, step number 1, it would be look at the options for liability protection and get those in place. I think that's something it's so easy to overlook. And right, like how many landowners have ever heard of the recreational use statute? Not very many, unless they've been in a lawsuit or come to my class, right? So I think that's step number 1. The second thing I would say is just the importance of having things in writing. I mentioned earlier, we're not always the best at that, right? Like our industry was built on a handshake, and a lot of folks, still think it is that way, or at least wish it could be that way.
Well, and sometimes you kind of feel like you're my friend. I'd never sue you. Sign this document. And some people are taken back, like, really?
Sure.
You think I'm that type of person? It's like, no, this is something our attorneys require
That's
for
right.
anybody that steps foot on the property. So I do think there's kind of that, internal, like, I'm going to look bad to my friend if I make them sign this document.
I hear that all the time. My own father gives me this spiel, right? So I hear it. But so I would say 2 things on that. One of them, like you said, is from a legal perspective, you have to protect yourself. Sometimes your insurance company requires things like waivers, right? Sometimes the FSA or the NRCS office or the county appraisal district is going to require that written lease. So it may be out of your control anyway, and you have to have something in writing. The second thing I would say is instead of looking at that as something that could harm the relationship, we need to look at it as something that's protecting the relationship, right? All that these contracts really are, especially a lease agreement, is let's sit down and agree to how we're going to hash out things that may happen, right? There's no reason it has to be adversarial. Really, it can just be, let's make sure we're both on the same page with how we'll handle something that might come up down the road. That's protecting a relationship, right? I don't think that it's trying to destroy one. So I really try to push that. And that's true with, things like contracts. I'll tell you the other place that we're terrible about getting things in writing, and you're going to like nod your head off when I say this, is access easements, right? If you are crossing somebody else's property to get to your own, you had better make sure that right to access your property is in writing and recorded at the courthouse. Because I'll tell you, one of the most common myths I hear people tell me is that I can't be landlocked in Texas. That is completely false. You absolutely can be landlocked. You may be able to get access under certain circumstances if you go to court and prove certain things, but there's no automatic access. So that's another place that, I like I said, my second point is get things put in writing. Don't overlook those access easements, because I'm telling you, especially as we see more and more new landowners, more and more places getting broken up and sold as smaller parcels, I'm getting calls on this on a weekly basis from all over the state.
Yeah. So me being in the hill country, German settled neighbor.
Yep.
And now the hill country, obviously everybody can see, is expanding. I live here in Fredericksburg, and doing more of the deals in, around Mason and Junction,
Yep.
and Llano, seeing those handshake easements, and it's not deeded at the courthouse.
Yep.
They think it's deeded at the courthouse. So due diligence on my part as an agent with my title company is to really make sure accessibility is there and in writing. And I hear it all the time. Oh, you can't have a landlocked property. I'm like, you can have a landlocked property if you haven't went to court to make it not.
That's right.
It doesn't like you said, it's not automatic. And, to me, access is money. Like if you can't access your property, the property becomes devalued immediately. Also, too, there's a handful of land lenders that will not lend unless the accessibility is filed, because if they have to resell that, if they don't have legal access, so to speak, if another person buys it, I mean, that becomes a whole lawsuit of, it's due diligence from the person, the owner who's selling it, but normally it takes the help of a farm and ranch expert to guide them through why it's important and why we need to get the buyer and the seller together and make sure that this is, put in the title commitment and deeded at the courthouse. So
that's right. And like you say, just because you've been using it for years or because grandpa had a handshake deal with their grandpa, none of that legally matters. Like you have to make sure you have that access.
So there was something else you talked about in your class that really blew my mind. I'm trying to think back. It wasn't just recreation. The due diligence of the landowner. So you use an example like of a hunting lease, or say you allow people to hunt on your property. And one of the topics you talked about is that, it's not one-sided. The landowner kind of has to do a once over the property. Because there may be a bull hole or an armadillo hole or snakes are out or, they're, a fence down or something. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like the due diligence, it's not just one-sided, but, having those, there's still obligations. You can't just completely say, oh, I'm blanket covered, I don't have to do anything.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to stay out of the weeds because we could get into an hour-long, in-depth discussion of that. But yeah, so as a landowner, right, one of the ways you can protect yourself is make sure you have warned people who are coming on your property about any dangerous conditions, especially ones that might be hidden, right? So you have this obligation to people coming on your property to warn them of hidden dangerous conditions. And so you have to act reasonably in doing that. So I'll say that, and inevitably some guy in the back who's like, a plaid shirt, kind of grouchy, is going to be like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, I can't drive my whole 10,000 acres every day and look for new holes from the hogs. No, it says a reasonable inspection, right? So I don't think it's reasonable to drive it every day. Do I think that the opening weekend of deer season, I might make a circle on that Thursday? Yeah, I sure might, right? And the other thing I tell people a lot as far as warnings go, even if you're not legally required to make certain warnings, if you can make them and avoid an injury, we're all better off, right? So you said snakes, which is a great example. Under Texas law, generally speaking, a landowner is not liable for snakes on the property. There are some crazy exceptions we don't have to go into, but generally you're not liable. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't warn people, hey, keep an eye out for snakes when you're out there, like they're here, we've seen them, whatever? No, warn them, because you're better off for there never to be an accident that occurs instead of in court being able to successfully prove you didn't have a legal duty, right? So that's something else I always tell people keep in mind, like overwarn. You're always better off in that scenario, right? Especially if it can avoid a problem.
So I'm not going to get in the weeds with this, but this has happened to me more than once. So I'm going to show a ranch that another agent has listed by another landowner. Mm-hmm. I have clients and and we're going to walk the ranch. We're going to drive it in a buggy. We're going to do all these things. More often than not, I will have people show up in clothing not appropriate.
Yeah, big heels. Big heels.
Yeah. So high heels, flip-flops, open-toed shoes, no snake boots. Mm-hmm. And my thought process, now, mind you, I have a whole tub in my truck of like everything that anybody can need if they show up. And I let the clients know, listen, we are going to show a ranch. Please dress accordingly. And then I put some items in there. But that my thought is that what if my client gets bit by a snake on somebody else's property? Is, as a real estate professional, it's really something we haven't thought of, but more and more accidents have been happening. Also too, the ATV
Yeah.
actually had a broker driving around a family, and the kid didn't have a seatbelt on and he fell out
Yeah.
during a showing. So what, tips and guidance can you give farm and ranch agents working, in this atmosphere as the third party representative to the landowner?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and one that you guys should really think about sort of, as an industry, what can you do and what should you be doing there? I mean, obviously you've got insurance as a real estate agent. I mean, so I think that prong is covered. But the other thing I think that you need to think about is making some of those warnings in writing to people. And I think that's true whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, right? Like if you think about if I'm listing a farm and ranch property and I'm going to have people coming out to look, it would be a really good thing in that listing to put some, disclosures. Like if you're coming to look, be aware of, these however many things. The classic example of a hidden dangerous condition would be like an old abandoned well. That's something that is there. The potential buyer may not. Go ahead and make that warning in writing, right? Because any way you can make those types of warnings, have them put in writing, make sure you give those. I think that's a really good protection. Another discussion we have a lot at real estate meetings is, should you guys have waivers? Like, should you be having folks sign a liability waiver before you ever let them get into that buggy? I mean, the lawyer in me says, yeah, you probably should, right? So I think that's something else to consider. The other thing, I mean, we talked about this from kind of a landowner perspective, but I would take a look at that recreational use statute in the Agritourism Act. The recreational use statute, I think, may be limited to owners, lessees, and occupiers of land. But I think that Agritourism Act talks about any person is not liable if there is a recreational or educational activity. So to your example of the folks riding around the ranch in the buggy, I realized they were there to tour a ranch to see about buying it. But riding in an ATV on ranch land also seems kind of recreational to me. So, I think it would sure be worth considering. Could those statutes apply? And do we have our things set up to where we could at least make that argument if an injury occurred?
Absolutely. It's something more and more as I hear some of these horror stories, and a lot of it is out of your control. Like, living in the hill country, had a client actually fall down the side of a hill and hurt himself, and no cell phone service and all this other stuff. And talking about waivers, at first, some brokers had them out there. And I thought, gee, that's really smart. But also the kickback was, oh, this is silly. We're selling ranches and we've done it the same way for so long. So I'd like to actually probably offline dive a little deeper into that, because I do think, we do have insurance, but I'm not sure how much of it would cover those accidents and liabilities. I mean, we typically carry, as farm and ranch agents and brokers, errors and omissions insurance for the contract, not for the act of doing the job.
Showing the property.
Yeah. So, that is, I think, on a high level, some of our premier ranch brokers that are showing very large ranches with a lot of potential dangers or situations, it's uncontrollable. I'd like to dive into you with that offline and maybe work on that. That would
the other thing I would hit on there, you're talking about, we've always done it this way. We haven't used waivers. That's right. But your clients are different now, right? I venture to guess the clients you're showing ranches to today look very different than the clients somebody would be showing ranches to in the 90s, right? And so I think as we see our clientele change, as we see more folks from other states or cities looking to come into the hill country, right? More and more of that smaller kind of ranchette setup. I just think that you've got a much different situation than we had in the past when we were not thinking about those types of issues.
Absolutely. We're seeing, at least in my area and type of farm and ranch sales, a lot of brand new landowners and or the dream Texas ranch landowner. I worked my whole life in Houston, made a ton of money, and now I want to own a ranch.
Yeah.
And like I said, I really focus on being the source of the sources. I had a broker that I started with. She was very adamant about, listen, you're an expert in the promulgated forms and the sales process of real estate. Everything else needs to be referred and guided to the licensed professional, of that specific question. for example, when people ask me about floodplains and I'm like, okay, well, we need to get with the surveyor. The surveyor is going to have the exact lines. And then we need to get with a developer or some of our improvement builders that can say, hey, based on what I'm seeing, here's the feasibility of this, or we can, elevate this out of floodplain and have it re-engineered and recertified with FEMA. So getting those experts there, and like you, people ask me all the time, well, can I just pull up make a copy of the forms, the liability forms? And I'm like, well, who's going to battle that form in court? Like Google's not going to do it for you.
That's right.
And take the small amount of money to invest and have that form drawn up correctly. Because if it's not, like, maybe that copy form is invalid or the verbiage is not up to date with the law now. And so it's really funny how people just kind of on a whim, and I've seen it. I've seen outfitters do it. I've seen ranchers do it. They just put something together, and if something terrible did happen, they're not protected. So I love that you brought that up.
Well, and the thing too, Lindsay, like the fraction of the money you'll spend on the front end to get a good like release drafted or contract drafted versus the amount of money you'll spend in a lawsuit, even if you win, like it's crazy. And like I said too, on those releases or contracts, get those done one time, especially on a release. You can use that release over and over again. You don't have to go get a new release for every person that comes to hunt. You've got one that your lawyers drafted up. We know it's legal. We're confident we're good to go. I mean, like I say, just you'll save so much money if you do that on the front end instead of, on the back end having to litigate whether it was valid.
Okay, just spitballing here. Okay. How much would it cost to come to you and say, hey, I wanna get a liability waiver for my property? Spitball. So, high, low.
Yeah, I'm a bad example because I can't have private clients. So I don't charge anybody. I can't draft anything for anybody. It would, and again, I'm going to have, my friends are going to call me and be
what you have seen.
Why are you undercutting me? That's what my friends are going to say. It would shock me if it cost over $1,000. I think that would be a high number. I would guess closer to 500. Now I'm completely guessing on that. But like standard liability waiver, nothing crazy. It's not like they've got 57 different, wedding venues and Airbnbs and shooting ranges and whatever. Standard hunting waiver, it'd shock me if it was more than about $500.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So just to put it in perspective, when people are really, cutting corners, that definitely should not be cut. Yeah, like you said, hiring an attorney per hour to battle a lawsuit versus having this waiver drawn up professionally and correctly in the eyes of the law. Just, I just feel, for me, letting our audience hitting home, even with our real estate professionals, because your job is to negotiate the contract and to follow these forms, but also you want return business. This is a people job. We're in the business of helping people. So as a part of your, at least for me, my being my spirit as an agent, I like to be remembered of, man, she really went above and beyond. She's very knowledgeable in this field. She was able to point us in the right direction to get the exact legal answers by a licensed professional. So I really love that, just hammering this home, because I do think that some agents just get into I showed the clients the ranch, we wrote an offer, and that's it. And I'm sitting here going, okay, there's 4 years of either party to sue based on anything can happen in those 4 years. And, I don't know, in my opinion, in the way I do business, I feel like if I've given them a list and guidance, like I said, as a closing gift, I get your what laws landowners need to know, and really helping them to say, hey, I need to be well-versed and educate myself. Owning a ranch is a lifetime educational experience, as you know. So I just, like I said, everybody, she's amazing. These tools she's provided us literally for free is an unbelievable gift to our industry. So I truly thank you for that. I'm sorry. I'm so happy to have you. Like, I never thought this was possible to get you on my podcast as an icon in our industry.
Well, you're very sweet. Thank you for saying that.
No, you're very welcome. So real estate agents, I want to talk about farm and ranch specific agents. Is there any advice or, things you would like to share with us as an attorney looking at all these liability options and educational pieces?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it before, but I think understanding that property access hugely important for farm and ranch agents because, like I say, we're just seeing so many issues with that, landlocked property and issues with easement. So I think that's a huge thing. Another thing I think is so important, especially first-time landowners looking at a ranch, they don't know what to look at. They don't know what questions to ask. So to the extent you can have knowledge generally about kind of agriculture and ranches, all the better. So for example, they aren't going to know if that's a good fence or a bad fence. That's nothing to do with you being a real estate agent. Like you don't learn that in your real estate agent classes. But man, it's helpful if hey, look, we got problems with this fence. You're going to have to redo that or whatever. Same thing with like ponds. I know with extension, we do like pond management classes all the time. I don't do those, but like the pond people do. And that's something that's been real popular with real estate agents, like how to evaluate, the pond situation. How to evaluate the quality of the grass, right? Like, has this been overgrazed or not? Like, there's just so many things like that, that if you've got that additional expertise, or maybe more importantly, who to go ask those questions of, I think super helpful. And so, like I say, we've recently kind of started in the real estate agent education realm, offering CE credits. Dr. Blake Bennett in Dallas is kind of leading that up for us. But he's got classes on things like evaluating a pond and, that kind of stuff to give that sort of information. The other resource I would really push for anybody doing farm and ranch sales is your local county extension agent. We have agents in every county. They are like the boots on the ground. You're in Fredericksburg, Lindsay. You've got one of the best right there. Brad Rader is a fabulous agent. He knows everything and everybody, and he loves to help people. Go visit with that agent. Talk to them about the property you're looking at. I'm telling you, they know that property. They probably know 3 owners before and can tell you all the details. So that's a resource also. Don't overlook if you've got questions or need information. Keep in mind your local AgriLife extension agent can be really useful.
It's crazy how many farm and ranch agents don't know about that resource, and what they offer is amazing. So say I'm coming in, like I do Gillespie County. How would I find out what's the best way to search for my local extension officer?
You know what? We've actually got a website I can send you, and I think it's called Find Your Extension Agent or something, but I'll send you where you've got a link, and we've got a list of every county, every agent in those counties, and their contact information. So that's extremely easy to do, easy to find. And like I say, we've got somebody in every county in the state.
That's awesome. Actually, for everyone listening, I will drop that in the description so you can click on it, because I think it's very valuable to them to start getting that guidance. I know that I'm even terrible. Like I haven't been up to Gillespie County and chatted. Like, I have had enough experience, but at the same time, things are constantly changing. Yep. Laws are changing. More lawsuits are happening. And so being knowledgeable about how to help your clients and keep growing in this industry.
That's right. And I'll tell you another example where I think that's super important for ag real estate agents to have experience is with obviously ag use valuation property taxes, right? Huge issue. And one that you can sure step in if you're not careful and you give bad information to that client, and then they get their tax bill and they're like, what on earth, right? And so, but I think there's another example of your agent being so helpful, because I've heard agents talk sometimes, somebody went out and bought a property and they had this idea that I'm going to, do this ag enterprise on that land. And that was never feasible, right? Like that wasn't going to work there for whatever reason. That was not going to be a good option. Had they gone to the county agent and talked to them about, okay, either this is what I want to do, will it work on this property, right? Or this is the property I'm buying, what are my options to keep that ag use valuation on the land? And so just don't overlook that, because lots, especially like in the last month or so, it's the time of year when everybody got their notices, right? So we've had lots of questions on that as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I get people that ask me all the time, like, okay, so it has an ag exemption. What does that mean? What are they doing? And, what if we wanted to do X, Y, Z? The biggest misconception I've seen is that people come in thinking every county has the same checklist.
Exactly.
For wildlife and agriculture. And I'm like, no, I said, over here, they consider that this or this doesn't apply. And also too, educating clients maybe that can't do ag. Ag is just too much for them based on
Yep.
the checklist that the county provides.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's look into putting a wildlife plan together.
That's right.
Because there are some wildlife plans that are easier on, and I say physically easier on the client. You don't have to load a cow into a trailer. You
Yep.
don't have to worry about goat's heads stuck through a fence. The common things, and some of our older clients, just doing some of that heavy lifting is just not something they can do. So wildlife does have some check boxes that are very feasible physically for
Yeah. I think that's right. And I think too, keep in mind, we talked about the leasing handbook and the leasing class earlier. Leasing can be a great option for that, right? If you've got property and you just don't physically either can't or don't want to keep the cows or the goats or whatever you might have, look at leasing that to somebody, right? I guarantee you'll have a line of young ranchers out the door who are interested in leasing that property. You can make some income, you can keep your property tax valuation, and they can be the one who has to be out there doing the physical manual labor.
It's so funny you say that, because leases, cattle leases, goat leases, even hunting leases. I mean, I tell people when they call me, I said, listen, it's a unicorn. Just go buy a ranch. I'm like, when they come up, there's already, the landowner already has a list of people or relative. It's so funny. They're so hard to find, but you're right.
Yes.
Partnering with somebody legally to help keep that evaluation. The other thing is new landowners. This is kind of something I've done just to keep in touch. They don't understand. Hey, listen, April 30th or 1st, whatever.
April 30th. Yep.
Yeah. So whatever the date may be,
Yep.
I like telling my clients, hey, listen, next year, you bought the ranch in October. Next year, you have to have your game plan together. So let's work on it now and get the paperwork in now. So you're not, oh no, it's April 29th and I have to put a full wildlife plan together that hasn't been officially approved. So I like to do my due diligence. Like I said, that customer service. Hey, listen, we need to make sure that you don't miss this filing, because it could cost you 5 years in back taxes?
Oh, it could be. Well, yeah, it depends on the situation. It's 3. The statutes changed a little bit. So but still, heck, even a year, the difference that valuation can make can just be insane. And the other thing you say there, also, I have people who don't realize when they buy property that's in ag valuation, even if it's already in ag, it's been in ag for 100 years, you still have to go fill out that paperwork to get it in your name. And if you don't do that, you're liable to be stuck with that, losing that ag valuation. So hugely important, something not to overlook. And I think you're exactly right. Talk about a service that the real estate agents can provide. Remind people of that. Even if all you tell them is, hey, go to the appraisal district, have them look up your property and figure out what forms you need to do. If that's all you know, if you just know to tell them that, you just save them a ton of headache and hassle and money if they didn't know that information.
Yeah, it's amazing what can happen when you miss that date. And like I said, majority of the clients we're dealing with are new landowners. So this is a total foreign concept to them.
Well, I had a couple of years ago, I had a guy up here who his family had been in ag forever. I mean, they had farmed forever. They bought a farm that had been farmed forever. And they didn't know that they had to go to the appraisal district and change that. And they had to pay the difference in taxes for that year. And he was so mad. But I mean, there's an example. It's not just new landowners, right? Like that guy had done this his entire life and they didn't know.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to get wrapped up here. Is there any advice you would like to leave us with? I'm going to put the ball in your court because you are the expert in our field for our landowners and our farm and ranch brokers and agents listening today.
Well, you're very kind. No, I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and you helping sort of get the word out about some of the resources that we have. I mean, final thoughts, I would just say like owning land in Texas is awesome, right? It's such a fun thing. It's such a privilege to get to have, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And so I would just encourage you, if you're buying land, if you own land now, take the time to kind of do your homework. Like I say, it doesn't have to be, something crazy. It can just be, you get one of these handbooks. Like you said, they're free on the internet. Just sort of peruse through so you know what questions to ask, what things to look for, what issues might come up. Take the time to educate yourself now because it's going to pay off in the long run.
Awesome. Well, just to remind everybody, we will have the links we discussed and the free copy of the PDF of those workbooks in the description. Thank you again, Tiffany. I am looking forward to our future. And I know you and I are talking about having some in real life classes together as well. Like I said, I love sharing and spreading the word and educating in this field, because truly I believe if we don't share the proper way to do this job, those secrets are going to die with us. And I feel the due diligence of keeping that legacy alive is very important. Like, I love selling ranches. I love owning land. I love hunting. And, it's really up to us to educate, new members of this cool group of landowners. So thank you so much for being here. I couldn't have asked for a better podcast guest today.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.